While I don't hate EA, I can't deny the fact that they make a lot of stupid decisions. Every year they seem to do something that annoys gamers, whether it's the DRM in SimCity, time wasting online passes, or the way they handle their sport franchises. The strange thing is that EA have always been like this throughout the years they've been developing and publishing games, and no matter what they do, they just can't seem to get in gamers' good books. One of EA's unpopular decisions that stood out to me at the time was when they announced they were making a new James Bond game called Goldeneye. However, it was not a remake or a sequel to the original N64 game that people loved. Instead, it was a game where you played as someone who literally had a golden eye. Once again, people complained about EA saying that they were simply trying to use the Goldeneye name to make money. I bought the game when it first came out, when it was called Goldeneye Rogue Agent, and I have decided to revisit it as it was one of the most interesting James Bond games to be released during EA's time with the license. So, is Goldeneye Rogue Agent a great game despite not meeting people's expectations, or is it an awful waste of time? Let's have a look. In the game you play as Jack Hunter, a former MI6 agent who was recruited by Goldfinger to help him in his war against Dr. No. The story takes place in a world where a lot of the James Bond villains exist at the same time, including Goldfinger, Pussy Galore, Dr. No, Oddjob Sr. and more. The concept of being part of a war between Bond villains is an awesome one, and it's cool to see all the characters in the same game. The story isn't taken full advantage of though, as the cutscenes feel rushed and they don't use the story to create any interesting setups. It's mostly just a vehicle to get you from one level to the next. With a game like this, you want to see the way the villains would interact with each other, or just how their weird, crazy personalities would collide, but this game doesn't go into any of that. Maybe if the presentation was better, then I could have enjoyed the story more, but thanks to how poorly the cutscenes are handled, the story is just a lot of wasted potential. Goldeneye Rogue Agent is a first-person shooter. You run through levels shooting at enemies and follow the objective arrow on screen. It's a pretty basic FPS, as while you can take cover and try and use tactics, for the most part you'll just be running down the linear levels, taking out the larger amount of enemies in your way. This sort of first-person shooting nowadays feels very arcadey compared to modern shooters, but I have to admit I enjoyed myself when going through the levels. It's not intense or dramatic, but it's fun on a basic level of, it's fun to shoot at bad guys. I wouldn't say it quite has the same appeal as games like Doom or Serious Sam, and I would guess that people who love those games would find Goldeneye Rogue Agent rather tame and dull. I'm also sure some people who like modern shooters would find this game to be boring, but for me the gameplay works well enough to make the thoughtless action not anything groundbreaking, but still make it enjoyable. Your character has a cybernetic golden eye which replaced the one that was shot out by Dr. No. You can use your golden eye to use 4 different powers. The first one allows you to see enemies through cover, the second one can be used to hack into systems, the third one creates a shield around you protecting you from gunfire, and the last one lets you push enemies to the floor from a distance. The GoldenEye powers are okay to use, but once you unlock the shield, it's the only one you're ever going to use. I don't have any complaints with these powers in terms of gameplay, as it does add a small amount of depth into each gunfight, but the concept is a bit stupid. While this isn't a completely serious game, having a golden eye does seem a bit cartoonish and futuristic for it to fit into the James Bond universe. The point of the game is about controlling a James Bond villain and doing things the way that only they could do, but in terms of gameplay, the only difference between this and the other James Bond games is the GoldenEye powers, and it doesn't really work. You can take hostages in the games, but it isn't enough to make you feel like you're playing as a James Bond villain. Once again, it doesn't make the gameplay bad in any way, but there should have been more here than just the kind of out of place eye powers. Oddly enough, dual wielding plays a large part in this game. Most of the weapons are one-handed, and when you find a weapon on the ground, you can choose to either hold it in your left or right hand. So you can either have just a shotgun with grenades in the left hand, or a shotgun in the right hand and a machine gun in the left hand, as well as any other combinations you can come up with. The dual wielding works really well, as they manage to keep the control simple enough so you're never messing around with your weapons for too long. If you walk over a weapon, you just press A with either L or R and you're good to go. There is one problem with it though, and that's the way they make you change up your weapons, as every gun you find only has 2 clips worth of ammo. As this is a shooter where you just run through, you will burn through the 2 clips very quickly and lose the weapon, meaning you'll have to find a new one. For the most part it isn't a problem as there are guns everywhere, but in the later levels you need to have the better weapons, but if you run out of ammo in the middle of a gunfight you'll lose your gun and have to go back to the default pistol, which is almost useless. This does make the later levels frustrating, but overall the dual wielding is fun and does help separate the gameplay from other FPSs. Something that does make the James Bond games stand out is the variety of the gameplay styles, and unfortunately Goldeneye Rogue Agent is a letdown in that department. The whole game is nothing but running through levels shooting at people. There really isn't anything more to it. Maybe in one level you find a switch that electrifies a floor to kill enemies, and maybe there's another level where you can use zip lines, but really you're just shooting at the same 3 to 4 guys. This isn't helped by the fact that the graphics aren't anything special. They haven't aged too well and there isn't anything visually interesting to see, as it just sticks to mostly grubby looking colours. It might sound weird, but despite these problems it never felt generic or repetitive. These problems stop you from really getting sucked into the game, but the fact that the gameplay is arcadey stops the linear repetitive nature of the game from being too big of a problem. The game is also fairly short, as it took me around 5 hours to beat it. It would have been nice if it was longer, but the fact that it was only 5 hours long meant that it didn't outstay its welcome. Goldeneye Rogue Agent is, at the surface, a very flawed game. It doesn't take full advantage of the idea of going into the world of the Bond villains, and instead gives us a pretty standard FPS. Saying that, it is fun to play due to the small differences in the gameplay, like the Goldeneye powers and the dual wielding. The game's main flaw is not being what people wanted. It isn't a cool, interesting spin-off, and it isn't the sequel to the original Goldeneye. If you can disconnect the game from the original N64 game, then there is some mindless fun to be had here though. My score is 5.5 out of 10. If you can ignore all the nonsense surrounding Goldeneye Rogue Agent, then you will find an ultimately flawed but decent experience.